So the way that Carl explained this day to me is that we're going to talk about some things that you're going to have already some familiarity with, which is really a blessing for me because, quite honestly, when it comes to the topics of kind of learning to listen and respond and kind of securing a foundation for intimacy, I'm usually talking to people that have never thought about these things. So I'm going to make some assumptions based on the fact that you have experience, you have interest, you have history, and hope that what I can contribute will be helpful to that. And we'll end, particularly this morning and this afternoon, we'll end with a Q&A where we can, hopefully talk about more specific things that you're interested in or concerned about or want maybe some feedback from. I want to put the in everything that I say, both this morning and this afternoon, under the context of God's desire to have a loving, trust-filled relationship with us. That is the center. That's the goal. When Jesus is asked what's the greatest commandment, I think that sometimes we don't fully comprehend what that question was in the first century. That we imagine that the greatest commandment, like what's the most important one of all the hundreds of commandments there are, what's what's number one, that kind of thing. And that's fair. That's a fair evaluation that's being asked, like what's most important to get right of all the commandments, and Jesus answered love, love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbors yourself. But that question about greatest really has to do with what's the command that rules all the other commands. See, that's the thing. It's not what's the most important command, it's what's the command that rules all the other commands. That would have been the interest of a first century scholar or Pharisee or someone who, because within the ancient world, this gets interesting, and I'm not going to stay here very long, but within the ancient world, in terms of both the philosophical schools and religious systems, this idea of the first principle, what's the principle that's above all other principles? What overrides and rules over all the other principles? When we think about just our world in terms of forces, the different forces that are, to bear in the universe, gravity and, these different things. It's kind of like, what's the force that rules all the forces? And within Greek thought, the word logos is central to this, first principle. So when John says that Jesus is the logos, he's the word, that doesn't simply mean he's the communication of God. Right. He's the first principle. He's the word that rules over all the other words. Okay? So when Jesus answers that great commandment question and says it's about love, that means that command to love God and to love others, to love one another, to love our enemies, that central first principle rules all the others. Wow. And so when we come to talk about things like listening to God, hearing from God, that we're understanding that in this context of love. So that's why Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 14, follow the way of love and eagerly desire spiritual gifts, especially the gift of prophecy, that love rules over those things. So without that understanding, then I think we just get way off base. If we think that hearing from God is about conquest or kind of, is about being right, or we will find ourselves kind of, even if we're a few degrees off down the road, being very far off from the target, which is love. My experience of learning to listen, and we'll get into to the notes, but my experience of learning to listen really began at my conversion. I wasn't raised in religion. I didn't go to church, but a handful of funny times as a child. I was part of what was happening in the Jesus movement and friends becoming Christians, and that kind of provoked me to want to read the Bible so I could defend myself against their obnoxiousness, and it was in the course of reading the Bible, in particular, kind of backtracking from the Gospels and reading in the prophet Isaiah, and where it says he was despised and forsaken of men. I had not put together that passage in Isaiah 53 is talking about Jesus, who I was just getting a little familiar with by reading the Gospels, but that phrase, whoever that was kind of offered up for my benefit, that person was despised and forsaken, when I read that passage, it is though an arrow shot out of the page and went through my heart and said, "You're guilty of that."
Wow.
So that precipitated my very first ever prayer, which was, "God, if you're up there, I'd really like to know. And if it has something to do with this Jesus, help me figure that out." That was all precipitated by an encounter with his word, right? Not just reading and reflecting and thinking on it, but I had an encounter with his word being living and active and sharper than any two-edged sword that kind of drilled me in the center of my life. So that was kind of the starting line for my faith. And I was encouraged and nurtured in a evangelical Presbyterian church, God's Frozen People. So proud to be among them. That was my, that was the setting in which I kind of grew up as a young Christian. I was actually in university when all this happened, and I dropped my major, which was economics, and I thought, I just want to know the Bible better. I actually wanted to drop out of college altogether. My mother, God rest her soul, she begged me not to do it. Like, cool. Don't throw, they wanted to have me deprogrammed, because nobody was, they really did. Like, they thought, wow, he's just gone out of his mind. But my mother, God bless her, she begged me to not drop out of university. So I thought, well, how can I make this about what I'm interested in? And so I studied ancient history.
So good.
I studied Greek, Roman, and Egyptian history. That was my major in university. I just wanted to know the Bible better. Mm-hmm. And then I went off and studied theology in an academic way because I wanted to know the Bible better. And in the context of that, I never lost that sense of engagement, like something more than the text, something more than just, learning about background and learning the languages and all of that kind of thing. There was always in my heart and mind and goal this encounter with truth, that's what I was after. But something that was apart from God's word, that kind of came into my life in an unexpected way. That I had a core group of friends. I lived in Vancouver. Nancy and I are family. We were all involved with churches there. Most of us were Americans living in Canada. We'd all gone to Regent College, this graduate school I'm talking about. And one of our number, Ken Blue, had come to California and to Fuller to do his doctor, whatever it was, the D-Min, and encountered John in a course at Fuller Seminary. He comes back, tells all his friends, I had this course, and it wasn't like any other course, and Ken had terrible back problems. He came back healed, and he said, they're going to do a conference of this course. Why don't we go down there? So that was 1983 or whatever it was, 1, 3, 4, whatever it was. Wow. We all went down to the conference. In this circle of friends, some of them were Pentecostal. I was thoroughly evangelical. The main difference between Pentecostals and evangelicals is evangelicals read books, Pentecostals listen to tapes or CDs or podcasts. But my more Pentecostal friends were always concerned. They wanted me to, they weren't sure I had the Holy Spirit. And I knew that they weren't sure that I had, so it was all fine, but we go down to this, this Vineyard conference where, the Holy Spirit is kind of, front and center, and now they're all looking at me, like, how's David going to respond, and so how I responded initially was I thought, wow, this is kind of the first credible way of doing some of these things that I've ever seen, that I thought didn't, wasn't just about show or, manipulation or something. I was really touched. It wasn't I had a theological conviction against anything, that had to do with God actively being involved in our lives, but I just hadn't seen credible kind of witnesses of some things like healing or, having special information, prophecy, So okay, it's a long story. I got to cut it short. But so these friends, Bob, George and Bonnie Malone, they were lovely people, and they were part of this group. And one night after one of these, evenings, they said, "Can we pray for you?" I knew, I thought they want me to speak in tongues. They want to, and sure enough, they started praying for me. Blah blah blah. Kind of repeat after me. I just loved them. They were sweet people, and I was glad that they would pray for me. And then Bonnie says, as they're praying for me, and I'm not obviously giving them back what they want, but she says, I see a picture of you, and I don't know what it means, but I see a picture of you, and you have a large parrot on your shoulder. I thought, I've always wanted to be a pirate, so I'm a pirate for Jesus. I thought, I love this picture. I have a parrot on my shoulder. She said, but you're trying to get this parrot off. I thought, I don't know what that means. The backstory is, and this is so important about prophecy, is that the most powerful kind of prophetic ministry that happens from one person to another is when God allows you to contribute to a conversation he's already having with that person.
That's good.
Right? He's already having a conversation with them, and you just get to kind of contribute to that conversation. That's the most powerful. So what the back conversation was, that just months before, I was accepted in Cambridge in England to do my PhD in New Testament, and that was the road I was going to pursue. I was going to do the scholarly thing. I was going to teach, do that. And I was walking and praying one night in our neighborhood, and I felt God interrupt my life and say, do you want to be a disciple?
Wow.
And I thought, wow, it hurt my feelings. Because, I was like a Ronald Sider guy. If some of you know what that is, like Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger. I was like that kind of disciple. I thought, wow, I'm not a disciple? And I felt the Lord say to me, he said, you think being a good disciple is being a good student. And you're a good student. But being a disciple is being an apprentice of the family business.
So good.
And I want you to be an apprentice of the family business. And I knew that had to do with the salvation of people.
Wow.
And I thought, because obviously I was saved from being without God and without hope in the world. And so that was very tender to me. But I thought, yeah, I'm for that. I'll do that. But the Lord said, and I want to do that through my church. And I thought, oh. Because I honestly didn't like the church very much. I just thought church was silly and somewhat foolish. And now I feel like God's saying I'm supposed to work in the church and give up this other road. And there's the kick line was, I said to the Lord, I said, I don't think I can do that. All I knew about the way that churches were led is, and I'd been, and I was a Christian. I went every Sunday. That's what Christians do. And because I read a lot and knew some, that most of the people that I saw speak, I heard books that they had read.
Wow.
They were just the messages out of books they'd read. And which isn't a bad thing. I'm not at all like judging that. I just said to the Lord, I can't do that. I can't, kind of repeat someone else's understanding or whatever. That was my struggle. I thought the only model I've ever seen about being a pastor or a preacher was doing it that way, and I can't do it that way. And that kind of left the conversation there. So back to this image of the parent. So a few hours later, after they prayed for me after that session, a childhood friend of mine named Mike Bickle had come out to that conference because we were there. We grew up together, little boys in the same neighborhood. Mike has always been a Pied Piper. He's always had a whole collection of people following him since he was 5 years old. And we were friends and had become Christians around the same time in Kansas City in the Jesus movement, and went to the same high school and kept in touch. And when he found out that myself and another of our friends from Kansas City were going to this thing in California, he said, I'm coming and I'm bringing some guys with me who I have some prophets. I said, really? You have some prophets? Mike always had something. It's like, you have some prophets. Okay. So sure enough, he comes out there and he's got a couple of very strange guys. And he says, this night after this session where I got the parrot on my shoulder, he has a friend, wouldn't be known to any of you. He's not one of the Kansas City prophets, at least, that most people would know about. Little tiny Hispanic guy, Pentecostal, really odd. He says, I want him to pray. So we had a bunch of these Vancouver people, and I want him to pray. And he would just got to go one from another. And I knew these people really well. And he was praying for them. It was really accurate. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then it was my turn. And I just thought, take your best shot. Like, right? Take your very best shot. That's good. And he starts off, he was very Pentecostal. Thus saith the Lord. The Lord says to you, you're not a parrot. You're a voice and not an echo. Wow, come on. It changed my life. Because it entered in the conversation. Oh, here's the other part. You're a voice and not an echo. Do it your way. Good. Wow. That's why I'm here today. It was entering in. So just to finish this off a little bit, at that same conference, right, it's obvious that people were tapping into the Lord leading them in their interactions, ministry interactions with other people. And I thought, I want that. I didn't see that was like a special class of people got to do that. It was just really clear to me, from what the scripture said, that this is God's expectation for us as his people, that we be led. I love John 10, my sheep will follow me because they hear my voice, right? And that's not just, we get the download. It's that we recognize his voice. We recognize the character and the tone and the tenor of Jesus leading us, and that we follow that. I've led for 25 years a really big church and not a really big community. So everywhere I go, I run into one of three types of people who go to my church, people who used to go to my church, or people who will go to my church. So, and I'll be in the grocery store and I'll be asking where's the flower aisle? And someone will say, turn and look at me. They've never probably met, but they recognize Pastor David, they say. They recognize my voice from saying, where's the flower aisle? Right? And it's that I know that voice. I know, that so it's that recognition factor of, I thought, that's for us, right? That's why, Moses in Numbers 12 and that big blow up with Aaron and Miriam and they're all hurt because this thing has happened where God has told them to call the elders together and he's going to put the spirit that's on him on them, and they start prophesying and the people don't want anybody else prophesying but Moses, and Aaron and Miriam are thinking all along, well, we've been in this from the beginning. We've been prophesying, what's this all about? Moses. God then has to discipline Aaron and Miriam, And you know, but Moses says, you know, are you, like when they say shut it down, you know, stop all these people from prophesying, he says, are you like jealous for my sake?
That's right.
Like, are you thinking, I want this job solely? He said, I wish that all of God's people were prophets. Now, that's either a frustrated, burned out leader, which is possible in Moses' case, or he's speaking the truth. He knew what God wanted.
Yes, come on.
And that's what Joel says. You know, God's going to pour out his Spirit on all flesh, and his sons and daughters are going to prophesy. Like this thing about like hearing and responding, hearing from God and speaking or acting on his behalf or praying, you know, on at his request, you know, that is meant for everybody.
So good.
And so I thought, well, that's me. I'm everybody. And I really resented hearing some of John's stories back in those days. Like the one I resent most of all was that story he had told about being on a plane or something, and he read adultery on the guy's like chest or his head or whatever. And I thought, I can read. You know, like God, just write on people. I'll read it, I promise. Like write on them, I'll read. Never, I kept looking for it in those days, like some writing to show up. It never showed up, you know, like I thought, I'm going to be terrible at this. Then I had this gal in our church, and she was in a home group with us, and she asked if she could meet with me, and it sounded pretty serious. She was in her late 30s and single, and she was hurting, and so we met at the church offices, and she tells me about this affair that she's having with a married man, and how, you know, she's desperate to be married and have a child, and she's fallen in love with this guy, and she knows it's wrong, and she's now under conviction. No one, you know, just kind of in her heart that she has to break this off, and how can she do it? She loves this guy. Maybe this is her last chance at the things that she wants most. And so she's pouring out her, God bless her, pouring out her story and her heart to me. And I'm thinking, you know, I'm going to encourage her to do what God has already put on her heart to do, break this off, and we're going to support her, Nancy and I, as best we can. She can call us in the middle of the night. We can, you know, we'll make a special effort just to walk alongside her. And I could kind of picture a 6 or 9 month journey of where at the end of that, you know, like, okay, you know, life goes on, right? That's what I imagined. And I thought, that's what I can do. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. But I also thought, Lord, if you have something to say, if you want to enter this conversation, like that was like new to me. Like, you know, it's like, would you actually like step into this conversation right now that she and I are having, full of tears in this office? Would you enter into that conversation now? So I said to her, you know, we're just going to take a minute and just kind of listen, and you know, and so I closed my eyes. I didn't want, you know, just to be staring at her, and I closed my eyes and I said, you know, Lord, what would you have us do? What would you want? And, you know, with my mind closed, or my eyes closed, you know, you have kind of the screen of your imagination right there. And on the screen, I see this necklace, like a piece of jewelry. And I think, man, is it Nancy's? Have I missed Nancy's birthday? Have I been looking at too many Zales catalogs? You know, like, I couldn't imagine why I was seeing a necklace, you know. And I thought, oh, I am so terrible at this. And then so I erased it, you know. It's like, give it another shot. Lord, do you have anything to say right now about this? And I see the necklace again. Now I'm thinking it's the pink elephant. Do not think of a pink elephant, and all you can do, think of a pink elephant. And so I can't shake it. And one more time, just feeling so terrible at this. And I said, Lord, do you have anything to say? And there I actually see the, you know, what the pendant is, you know, it's very detailed. And I just think, can that be you, Lord? Is that you? And you may not like this, but I felt the Lord said to me, good guess, dummy. That's what I felt like the Lord said. Good guess, dummy. And I said, what could that possibly mean? And as soon as I did that, As soon as I asked that question, like what could, silently in my heart, what could that possibly mean? It was like, da-da-da-da-da-da. He's given her a necklace. She's wearing it now. If she'll take the necklace off and give it to you as a symbol of her willingness to obey me, then I will take the emotional yoke of this off of her right now. So I looked at her, trying to look for the necklace, right? Can't see it. She's got a turtleneck on. I said, hey, are you wearing a necklace? She's thinking, why are you asking me that? She said, yeah. I said, could I see it? So she pulls it out. It's the necklace I see.
Come on.
So I said, here's the deal. The Lord says if you'll take that off and give it to me, and you got to know I'm going to throw it away. I don't know what it's worth, but I'm going to throw it away. Like I'm not just going to take it home and give it to my daughter or something. I'm going to throw it away. And if you're willing for that to happen, then the Lord's going to take this off of you. And she didn't know, right? So she, with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, took that necklace off and handed it to me. And the Lord touched her. She just kind of fell back. And first time I ever saw someone kind of laugh, like they were being tickled.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was kind of listening closely because, like I just was at my neurologist yesterday, and every time I go, because I've had a stroke, and they're, hopefully try and help me not to have more. And every time you go, you got to fill out this long neurological kind of thing, like what's happening to you. And one of the categories is, do you have uncontrolled laughter? That's a psychotic condition, right? Like, so I was listening closely for like, was this that I've crossed the line, I'm over the, I'm not in touch, but it sounded so healing.
Right.
And so this went on for just a little bit, and then she kind of sat back up and looked at me with like bright eyes and said, let's call him. It was over.
So good.
Not that she didn't still long to be married and have a child, and the heartbreak of delayed dreams. I mean, all of that was still true, but the link with this wrong relationship that I thought at best maybe 9 months, will get towards the end of that, the Lord did. So she left my office smiling, and I began to weep. Because I thought, how many times have I never even asked the question?
Right.
Do you have anything you want to say, Lord? So to me, follow the way of love.
Right.
It's about loving people that we know we don't know, and at least having an open heart to say, God, do you have something you want to contribute that comes from you, and not just, a lot of times it's just our experience, our wisdom, the Lord trying to fuel our compassion. I'm not saying that in every case, we now have the key, but sometimes the Lord wants to step into the conversation through us in a way that's powerful. Okay, so that's all background for talking about some things that I think will be helpful, will be familiar to you. But these are the things I've learned. So my history after those being in Vancouver was that my friend Mike Bickle asked us to come. We actually spent 1985 here in California with John in Yorba Linda, and then helped Blaine plant his church in Lake Forest, Blaine Cook, in the first kind of half of 1986. And then Mike, my friend, said, come back and help me. I got this church, I got these prophetic people, and help me do that. So I was there for a number of years. I was there when Kansas City became part of the Vineyard. I traveled extensively with all of the so-called Kansas City prophets, Paul Cain, Bob Jones, John Paul Jackson, Larry Randolph, you name it. I was kind of the B team for John, traveling internationally. Soccer has like the first division, second division, third division. Well, like in those days when John would travel, he would like have these things where leaders could come and be prayed for. And so like first division was like Paul Kane, and third division was Brent Rue and I, like in a room prophesying over leaders. So my history is I've seen everything. I don't know if everything is accurate, but I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of wonderful things. I've seen a lot of terrible things. And so I'm going to speak out of that history. I'm not here to retell that history, but I'm here to speak what I've learned out of that history. Okay, so here's, if you want to write anything down, you can use those notes that talk about listening and responding. 8 critical parts of the listening, responding journey. First one is really understanding God's will. Understanding God's will. And by that I mean both understanding kind of his good and please, this idea that what is the will of God? That it comes out of this desire for a loving, trust-filled relationship. So the will of God is not to make you great or wealthy or powerful. The will of God is not to conquer kingdoms through you necessarily. I mean, I'm talking about the will that rules all other wills. That the will of God is ultimately about serving, faith expressing itself through love in your life, and that will is discovered in a way that, well, I understand it as clarity-cost equation. There's a clarity-cost equation. The greater the clarity, the greater the cost.
Wow.
So if you know very specifically the will of God of what you're supposed to do, there is likely to be a significant cost to that. That's why you know very clearly that it's God's will. When I sat, Brent Rue, when he was sick, asked me to come back from England and consider, I know he also asked Carl to consider his church there in Lancaster, and I'd been there a few times with Bob Jones and with John Paul, and so I knew the church, and Brent and I were friends mostly from traveling, but we thought, okay, I love you, Brent, I'm going to come and look at it. We went, and I remember your words exactly, Carl, about the Antelope Valley. You said it was but ugly. That was your terminology. That was your spiritual kind of perception of Lancaster and Palmdale. You said, oh, that place is just but ugly. And of course it is. It's a unique place in that, we're on the northeast corner of LA County. And it has all of the problems of the urban core in this high desert, weird setting. So the gangs, the drugs, the violence, the poverty, it's all there, but it's out there on the edge in this, in the land where couches last 1,000 years when they're abandoned by the side of the road, like.
That's a great revelation.
Yeah, it is. So it's initially, especially, it's kind of a shocking. And my friends would think about me like, where should David be? He should be in an urban setting near university. Those are my people, right? Yeah, and so Lancaster, very, particularly our church, had a big heart for the poor. I've always said our church is of the poor. We don't have a ministry to the poor. We're a church of the poor. So it just seemed like not a fit, my initial experience was like, I don't think this is a fit. I came down and met with John and Carol during that trip it was 1990, early 1993. And I met with John and Carol and I said, I'm not doing this. This isn't for me. And they said, great, what do you want to do? We want to help you do that, and so I don't know for sure what I want to do, but I'm not doing this. And that was like on a Friday. And then I go back up there for the weekend. I wasn't going to speak there. I was just there to meet people, take a look at things. Brent calls me on Saturday night and says, he was battling cancer. He said, I'm really feeling terrible. Would you mind speaking at the service? I said, no, I'll be glad to. So now I'm speaking at the service Sunday morning. Well, unbeknownst to anyone, that night, a man, father, husband in the church, 2 little children. He'd gone to the ATM machine on Lancaster Boulevard. It's a very famous actual case because it caused banks to have to change where they put ATM machines. The ATM machine was behind the bank in an alley in Lancaster Boulevard. He went there at 10 p.m. at night to get $20 out of the ATM, and somebody came up behind him and shot him in the head and killed him for $20.
Nuts.
Now this is a family in the church everybody knew and loved, and so that news spread like wildfire. Through, shocked and grieved the church unimaginably. And so I'm told this on the way to church on Sunday morning. I'm thinking, wow. Like they don't even have anybody who's going to lead this service. I'm going to lead this service. I'm going to speak. I have to address this. I'm ticked now. I mean, I'm really heartbroken for the people, but I'm thinking, why did I ever agree to come?
Right.
This is so inappropriate, that they would have a guest, standing in this place at this time. All through worship, I'm complaining to the Lord, why did I come? I really missed it. I'm not, this is just bad. I'm going to do my best, but I just want to register in heaven. This is bad. This needs to go on my positive column, for I did hard things for the kingdom. I want this noted, and I'm complaining like that, and then God says, the reason you're here is because you're their pastor. But ugly. I really needed to know that very clearly.
Yes, you did.
To move my family from London to Lancaster. To embrace a church. I did a conference this summer for an Asian American church here in Orange County. There were about 1,000 folks total there. 95% college degrees or above. Wow. 95%. There were more doctors and lawyers than I'd ever been around at one time in my life. Our church had about 10% with college degrees, and a whole lot, a majority not even having high school diplomas. And again, I love that. I love what I spent the last 25 years doing. But I needed to know that this was God's will for me, because it was going to be hard.
Right.
It was going to be hard. God's a father. He's a parent. He loves us. No wonder there's a clarity cost equation. And here's the good news. When you don't have clarity, that's not a bad thing. When you don't have clarity, it means there's lots of options. And there's probably lots of grace for those options. So this idea that somehow gets in people's mind that I need God to tell me what breakfast cereal to eat in the morning. Well, Lord have mercy. You don't eat that and you're judged. That's not the relationship he wants with you. He gives you enough clarity to handle the cost. Okay? All right, second thing. Finding your eager desire. That's what 1 Corinthians 14 says, right? So Acts 2, when the Spirit is poured out at the day of Pentecost, Peter cites Joel 2. This is it. God's pouring out his Spirit. The end result is going to be a prophetic people. So fast forward to Paul writing in 1 Corinthians 14 to the Corinthian church, and he says to them, follow the way of love, eagerly desire spiritual gifts. There's an eager desire that's involved in this, especially the gift of prophecy, especially the ability to hear and listen, respond, and act on God's behalf, that this is something that you ought to have a keen desire for, an eager desire for. Now, that's essential because, like growing up in whatever God has for you in that is like, again, it's not easy. So I needed personally something like that encounter I told you about with a friend that I really cared about, and see how, witnessed how helpful that was to her, that I actually tried to have a desire to hear so that the outcome would be like that. So we're fueled, hopefully, in that eager desire by our desire to love others, to love them effectively, to want to offer whatever gifts that we do have in a way that's going to benefit them. Where this gets complicated is that I've come to discover and believe that desire is also the greatest distorter of revelation.
Interesting.
So somehow you've got to have the right kind of desire for the gifts, and then understand how vulnerable you are for desire to twist and distort and warp what you might hear or receive. It's the reason that, desire, the distortion of desire is the reason why, if you're a surgeon and you're smart, you don't operate on your children. Because your perspective is altered by your desire for a certain outcome. Now, this weighs in on our life in a way personally that's really important, in that we have to understand that the things that we deeply desire, that they can twist revelation. So I'll be very personal and vulnerable. There's a whole bunch of people who don't want me to die. That's their desire. God bless them. I have cancer and I'm supposed to die, from it. And they love me. And their desire is I not die. And that's mine as well. But I don't believe a one of them that says to me, you're going to live and not die. I heard so many people tell Brent he was going to live and not die. It's not wrong, it's not evil, it's not malicious, it's just people speaking out of their eager desire. And, here's one. Young person comes to you and says, man, the Lord told me I'm going to marry that one.
Well, that's a see you later.
I say, really, that one? Do you know her? No, not yet. Does she like you? No. I said, yeah, that, could be God, like Hosea.
Yeah.
Like clarity cost, like could be. But honestly, if you just really want to be married, watch out. Like your desire will twist your sense of God's leading in your life. You have to really check yourself. That's why we need one another so much. That I don't just let my desire dictate God's voice in my life. But I do have to have a desire to be God's voice for others.
Sure you do.
So somehow I have to juggle and manage it, that I have the right kind of eager desire. Now, what's helped me tremendously is that my eager desire gets focused on loving them and loving God. Because it's a loving thing to respond and represent God in some way. Like I every time I speak, I'm a classic introvert, and like most people, public speaking would have been my number one fear. And so in many ways, even all these years later, it's a sacrifice for me. And I'm always saying to the Lord before I do it, this is for you. Like this is my loving response to you, that I'm doing this, that, maybe not my favorite thing. Like, it's love. Like, so my target can't be, I want this result. Like, that can't be my eager desire. Like, here's the outcome I want. Therefore, that's what's going to fuel, my prophecy. No, it's got to back off from that. Because if it's just, this is the outcome I want, that desire will distort and twist whatever God actually wants to give you and what he wants you to contribute. Okay? That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep on. Where are we at? We're doing good. Overcoming insecurity and pride. Wow. I've been around some really gifted people. People who know stuff, like detailed stuff, that they have no way of knowing. Just like, wow. Like, how do you get that? I have had a few really good moments. Some of my best moments was Mike Pilavachi brought a 14 or 15-year-old kid from the youth group at St. Andrews when we were living in England. He brought him to my house, said, Mike said, David, I want you to pray for my friend. This kid couldn't even look me, and he was so shy, so inward, just sat there on the couch, looked down, and I thought, okay, I don't know, what would the Lord how would he have me pray for him? I put my hands on him, I started to pray, and the Lord said he's a father of worship leaders.
Come on.
He's Matt Redman.
Yeah.
He was 14 years old.
Come on.
That's.
It's a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day. But I've been around people who know, your street address when you were 3 years old then. But I'll tell you what ruins that. I'll tell you what makes that kind of gifting come to nothing. It's two things primarily. One is a misshapen personal identity, and the other is a misshapen theology. And that's why this afternoon we're going to talk about our life in God's Word and securing a foundation that's not misshapen, that our ideas about who God is and what he's doing don't undermine the gifting that he would express in our life. But it's also this sense of identity, right? Who am I? And it's always a huge danger sign when we start identifying ourselves by our gifting. It's just a huge danger sign. And so that's why I've never been a fan of the, let's call these offices, I'm this, I'm that, or even pastors are so prone to this. I'm a pastor. We had consultants come in during the time that we were transitioning our church to new leadership. Jonathan Rood, Brent's son, is the new lead pastor of the church that I've led for 25 years. It's really kind of a wonderful, only the Lord could twist it that way kind of story. But we had consultants came in, and one of their real concerns is, David, pastors tend to so wrap their identity. I'm a pastor. Now, what am I if I'm not a pastor? And I said to them, you don't have to worry about me. I never wanted to be a pastor. So this is not going to be a problem. It's not going to be I don't know who I am now. Because people tend to identify themselves by their gifts. I don't know if you're highly gifted prophetically, this is the worst possible, those people tend to think of themselves as prophets. And that twists your identity. And it twists it in really unhelpful ways in terms of what the gift is actually going to produce. Because you and I, in our worst self, were ruled by some kind of combination of insecurity and pride. In order to have any kind of equilibrium in life, you have to manage it. I've always pictured it myself as a teeter. I don't even know if they still have these in parks anymore, like a seesaw or teeter-totter, a board on a fulcrum with maybe a couple of handles, and you get on it with another person, hopefully roughly your weight, and you go back and forth, back and forth. Well, when I was a kid, going through a park, cutting through a park or whatever, there's one of those. I'd always run up one side, the downside of it, and then try to balance it personally myself by, distributing my weight kind of equally on either side to bring the teeter-totter kind of level, right? That's how most people try to get their equilibrium in life. They have to have some kind of balance that enables them to function. So what they do is that they kind of are shoring up their pride to counterbalance their insecurity. And so whenever you're dealing with someone you think, wow, they're super prideful and arrogant. Well, I guarantee you, underneath that shell, they're super insecure. Or you see someone just massively insecure. I guarantee you if they're functional. There's a lot of people non-functional. Like they've fallen off the teeter-totter. Like their institutions are full of people who think they're Napoleon or Jesus or, they've fallen off so far on the pride side, like their life simply doesn't work. And then there are also people who fall off on the insecurity side and they just are unable to function. So anyone who's functioning has found some kind of balance between those two things. Wow. And so a really insecure person will have some deep pockets of pride in their life. Now, as Christians, those two things are both false. Yeah. Pride is, I can do it myself. You can't. Insecurity is, I have no one to help me. You do. So both of those things are false. They have to be repented of. Mm-hmm. They have to be put to death in our life, both insecurity and pride. Now, for a Christian, the two things that allow us to have healthy equilibrium are somewhat like those things, but in opposite directions. The two things that we need to have are dependence and confidence. Good. Right? So Paul will say about himself, I'm the chief among sinners. Like if there's anyone who needs God's mercy, I'm in the front of the line. So that's a healthy kind of dependence, sense of self. But he will also say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. A profound sense of confidence. So the interesting thing is you would think, wow, arrogance or pride and confidence, they kind of look like parallel tracks. So you just have to move off one track to another. That's not the way that it works, actually. Pride has to become dependence. And insecurity has to become confidence. So again, that's why Paul says, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. So we find our confidence in places that we're insecure. And we find our dependence in those places that we would tempted to be proud about. If we don't, if we end up just, when the wind blows, it's one thing to balance the teeter-totter, on a really quiet day. It's a whole nother thing to balance that thing in a thunderstorm or in a tornado. Life's a tornado sometimes, and if you're balancing pride and insecurity, it won't work. And ministry is a tornado, and so what I've seen from really gifted people is their distorted sense of self. Pride will just massively ruin good revelation, good, and insecurity as well. The guy, I'll say his name because I love him. He's no longer living. But the guy who said to me, you have a parrot on your shoulder you're trying to get off. Or no, the Lord, you're not a parrot. You're a voice and not an echo. His name was Augustine Akala. And Augustine had lots of problems. And he, the interesting thing was that he was so insecure inside that if he did not know you, like our first encounter, we became somewhat of friends. But if he didn't know you, that was the healthiest time you would ever encounter him. Because as soon as he got to know you, he would try to manipulate you. But if he had no knowledge of you, he didn't care. And so insecurity, I was a lifeguard, as a teenager, and you learn to don't let the person drown you when you're saving them.
Good.
They'll clutch and grab onto you. And in insecurity, we'll do a lot of desperate things. And when that's hidden inside and you're using your gift to do those desperate things, to prove yourself or to get people to need you, or it really turns sick and ugly. And in a very downhill way. If I'm using you in pride just to be like notches on my belt, I would, because I became a Christian from a kind of non-Christian background, I really wanted evangelism to be part of my life. And I did everything, we did the Here's Life campaign, I went door to door, I did things, I would witness to people on public transport. And I realized one day that I was doing it for me, not for them. I was doing it so I could feel good about, hey, I witnessed today. I felt sick about that inside. I thought, oh my gosh. It was all about me. It was all about pride. It had nothing to do with kind of the genuine, and God can use, donkeys, right? So he can use us in our pride and insecurity if he is so gracious. But for us, that's no long-term solution. That's no sustainable place. And with listening and responding to God, if it's running through our jungle of insecurities and pockets of pride, it's going to be messed up. And that's not to say you start from you can only be really healthy. I'm just telling you what you want to steer towards. You want the goal to be, I'm coming from a good place that I have my confidence and dependence in Christ. That I know I'm not alone because he's with me, and I know that I desperately need him, and apart from him, nothing good is going to come. And when I'm in that place, then I'm in the best place for things to happen in a fruitful way.